everyone. Thank you for joining us for another eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests of all areas of ad tech, martech, and media. I'm Nancy Tefera-Santos, Senior Vice President, eMarketer Insider Intelligence. Today, we have a great presentation. You're going to learn how first-party data can improve the shopping experience and build customer loyalty. This is an important topic. It's your opportunity to learn. We want it to be an educational journey. So please send in questions using the chat window, and I'll get to as many as I can during the Q&A, so please keep them coming. Now I want to introduce two special guests from PwC. I have with me Rachel Dauenbaugh, Director of the Consulting Solutions Marketing Transformation Practice, as well as Mark Baker, also a Director of the Consulting Solutions Customer Transformation Practice at PwC. Rachel and Mark, welcome.
Thanks, Nancy. Excited to be here and excited to have this conversation that is near and dear to both of our hearts, I would say. Just a little bit more of an intro for myself. So yes, in marketing transformation along with Mark, but I focus particularly on more of the technology side, data monetization, data strategy, martech, ad tech. Been doing that for the last decade or so. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Mark, and I'll let him introduce himself before we get started. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Nancy and eMarketer team. Thank you to all of you. I know this is lunch hour probably for many of you, so extra special thanks. Mark Baker, as Nancy and Rachel mentioned, director here. On the other side of working with Rachel, which we do quite often, I primarily focus on customer engagement and digital strategies, driving loyalty through experiences and more traditional programs as well as measuring business impact of these efforts for companies. More recently, I've also been helping lead our personalization at scale efforts internally with Rachel and others, and have been co-leading some of our recent thought leadership and research around brand loyalty and behavioral shifts, which we're going to share some of that with you today. So for the next 25 minutes or so, we're excited to host a discussion really at its core around the importance of experience and of data. Experience as it pertains to developing that emotional bond with your customers, sort of transcending that transaction, developing greater mind share, greater wallet share, and ultimately improving customer retention, while obviously collecting robust first-party data to be able to activate that and allowing you as marketers to do more with less, or at least more with the same. So as we get started here, we're always pushing the market to understand consumer shifts, develop insights in that for companies like your own. We kicked off our last major study of this at the end of last year, and we've continued that into the early parts of this year with a 4,000 plus person survey across the United States, and then into loyalty and marketing executives to understand both sides of that dynamic. So we'll be sharing some of those stats with you here today. They're stemming mostly from those studies as well as some earlier ones. And then I'll pass it back to Rachel to discuss how you can future-proof your business to some extent around next steps when it comes to activating that data and developing data monetization. So consumers are shifting behaviors at accelerating rates. As a result of numerous factors, we've seen this more and more over the last couple of years, certainly beginning with COVID, and through today's macroeconomic environment and inflation, we're seeing even more changes. We've known for a very, very long time that there's generational deviations in behavior, which is well studied, but more than ever, we're beginning to see sort of intra-generational paradigms emerging, mainly looking at you, Gen Z, but we're starting to be able to pick this up more as we have more and more data. And this is amplified by things like omnichannel and social commerce and influencers and other dynamics, which are making the ability to market effectively to individuals increasingly complex. So today's consumer is discerning, they're demanding, they're unforgiving, and they're creating concern for companies that we talk to all the time around retaining their market position while also diversifying their products and their offers, which comes with risk, constantly making them balance where they invest their time and their resources and their marketing dollars to have the greatest ROI. And you can see why that's so important on this slide, because more than half of the consumers that we were studying consider switching brands after just one bad experience. Providing good experiences for companies is not good enough anymore, because switching brands is too easy. It's too top of mind. with so many great experiences out there to take that position. So one way to combat that is through loyalty programs. Nearly every company now, it seems, has some proposition to incentivize self-identification of customers by rewarding them, across a wide continuum of benefits in exchange for their data. It's very rare not to, and those that don't are looking at getting that. But the saturation of loyalty programs in the market also means that it's not enough to differentiate for most companies to retain their customers to drive future growth anymore. So companies are being forced to look at data a little bit differently, to activate personalization at scale, what that means, and monetizing their data in new ways, or they're going to miss out on attracting new customers and capturing new growth opportunities. So much so that the loyalty marketing executives on the back half of this study nearly unanimously told us that personalizing customer experiences is the number one investment that they're making in 2023. So I just want to highlight a few other kind of broad findings on this next slide from our survey. And you saw on the last slide briefly that more than half of the customers said that bad experiences would be enough to leave a brand for good. And sure enough, we see roughly a quarter of those that had been previously loyal to a company in the 12 months leading up to our study had actually made that switch. Our team, we say a lot, our team, that we believe the future of loyalty is experience-led. And picking apart these statistics a little bit more, that becomes more apparent. So over 80% of people are willing to share data to improve these experiences, with a similar percent of customers that expect personalized experiences. But on the flip side of that, and we'll touch on that here in a few more moments, there's also some limitations with the information that consumers are willing to share. Another interesting point in a world that's digital first is that 1 in 3 people believe that their loyalty is impacted through human interaction. 1 in 10 actually develop or say that they develop their loyalty to a specific brand during these moments. And we're all very much in the world now of what can AI do for me? How do I have AI, incorporated into my business and my processes, which is important. But it's also important to understand where and how that human element still plays a big part in the customer journey. And to really emphasize that point, over half the people said that they would be less likely to be loyal if that in-person experience was not as easy or enjoyable as the digital experience. So what does this mean? Like when we ask consumers about being loyal, and how does that compare to what loyalty leaders believe to be true? Well, on the next slide, we can show, you could quickly perceive that there's a very wide gap in that perception versus reality as a result of the pandemic, which in many regards may feel like a long time ago, but from a consumer standpoint and behavior standpoint, not so much. So only 2 in 10 of the consumers actually say what 60% of executives believe to be true, which is that customers are more loyal now than they were before. And you can see a range by industry at the bottom. Perhaps yours is shown here. A wide range, and some outperforming others. Entertainment, for example, much more than travel, which you may expect. But none of these really get us close to what brands feel to be true with their customers. Feel free to put in the chat if you feel this resonates with your brand. I'm curious if you agree or disagree. But again, reporting back on what we're seeing from our study. And reading into this a little bit further, by and large, loyalty remained unchanged despite what executives believe to be the case. So who are these 20% that are more loyal than they were before? And our data tells us that it's younger demographics, Gen Z and millennials specifically, who ironically are more likely to switch brands. We have a few of that here in a moment, but they're also more prone to being emotionally tied to brands that they determine that they're loyal with. That creates a very interesting challenge for marketers. But also those who are saying they're more loyal can be said about Hispanic and Black consumers as well as urban consumers. So if we dive into this a little bit deeper, into why consumers told us that they are switching brands and why they're more apt to switching brands. Again, we see a disconnect between the audiences from our 2 surveys. You can see here with the execs attributing most of their churn to price, especially over the last several months, but consumers telling us that this is actually something that it's experience driven. They're telling us very explicitly that experience is driving this change. In fact, bad experiences with products or services, or with customer service. In that order were unanimously the number one and the number two reason why each major generational band, so Gen Z, millennials, all the way up to baby boomers, were switching companies. And on the right side of the slide here, maybe not surprising, but an important reminder that brands often attribute their ability to attract and retain customers to internal factors that are within their control, such as their experiences across their channels, the rewards and benefits that they offer. And they attribute the losing of their customers to external factors, such as inflation or supply chain. But again, our data suggests the opposite, in which customers are leaving mainly as a result of factors that brands control. So customers in large part are attributing volatility to these experiences within brands' control. Why then are our customers more willing to try brands and being more willing to leave them when they do? This next slide, you can see that the younger generations are very much more likely to experiment and trial, but also despite being active loyalty members at their existing brands, they're more likely to stay with those new brands they're moving to. In fact, we did an earlier study around traveler sentiment, specifically in the airline industry as well as hospitality. And not only were we able to quantify that the highest value customers, those that had selected as being a top or the highest tier within existing loyalty programs, were most likely to try a new brand during sort of this reset. Those that had tried a new brand, 1 in 3 were going to stick with the new brand. So they're switching, and I'm curious if for anybody who may have experienced some churn in certain customer segments, if they were able to sort of discern if that was the highest value customers, but that was certainly a big concerning moment. So all these factors are contributing to the earlier point that the number one investment this year, executives were telling us, that was in personalization capabilities. So quick recap going into this next slide. Customers are switching brands more easily than ever, specifically the younger generational customers. They're more likely to stay with those new brands. Customers are expecting to be provided personalized experiences and willing to share, at least to some extent, personal data for companies to deliver that. As a result, executives are investing in this space, which is great. But what is personalization? It's a pretty broad term. It's a buzzword, but it means a lot, and it means a lot of different things to different customers. So we asked them, and feel free to add in the chat how you might define personalization. But when it comes to getting a personalized experience, which parts of that experience are most important to customers? And so you can see here sort of the split and the wide variety of what people were telling us they thought personalization had when it meant to value for their purchasing. So tale as old as time, price is king. And I think it's telling and interesting that consumers not only feel that price is a major factor in purchase decisions, which is old news, but the consumers feel price itself can be something that feels personalized when it comes to their specific moment in time on their journey. I would venture to say that many of us on this webinar today might argue that a pure discount or rebate strategy, for example, may not be how you would define personalization. Yet, and as we've been seeing for trending for a lot of time in the loyalty space, flexibility and rewards redemption for existing programs tops the list when it comes to that after price. And certainly you've probably seen many examples of programs evolving to be able to provide more of this your option with what you have. The other thing that jumps out to me on this particular site with these results is that personalization does mean so many different things, which creates a lot of opportunity, but it also creates some challenge too in understanding what might be in the minds of your particular set of consumers and segments. Special or exclusive access, remembering preferences from previous purchase history is a very common one. Employees remembering or even knowing what their needs may be when they're reaching employees in that particular part of the journey, as well as nudging customers into a direction they may be interested. What's really interesting here is actually that consumers, we learned, were mixed on which type of businesses were most important to have a personalized experience for. So industry by industry, there was a very wide range of for examples, financial services and banking, supermarkets and grocery stores, or hotels also are top of the list. Personalization made more sense for those moments across their purchase patterns. So the excitement is there that there's lots of things to play with here. The challenge is having your data in a place to maximize the returns here. So when it comes to personal data, what are consumers willing to share, at least here in the United States? Well, we asked about that too. And I spoke briefly at the top of the webinar about some limitations in the types of data consumers are willing to share. And then I promise I'll cover this and pass it to Rachel. But these were the results from our survey. And I think they're pretty interesting. And three things jump out to me, worth calling out. First is that there's still a very long battle ahead in the sort of war to win customer trust when it comes to personal data sharing and usage. Even data that companies have been collecting for a long, long time still tops out around just over half, if even half of the population, that they're comfortable sharing that for changes in their typical journey through interacting with your brand. So there's a great deal of work still to be done here. Two is that certain data, which is becoming more and more prevalent, such as location data or biometric data, is still dramatically low in terms of consumer comfort as well. Now, it's still pretty new, and I think we'll see this change relatively quickly, but you can see some things like email address and age, which have been around for a long time, and where that's been. And last is that being able to activate data or deliver true personalization at scale can unlock a huge opportunity of experience-driven growth while maintaining customer trust if it can be done effectively and you can understand the types of customers who are willing to share which type of information. So with that in mind, that leaves us asking, because we helped construct the storyline here, how can brands increase customer loyalty while safeguarding against customer volatility? So Rachel, would you be so kind to please take us from here?
Absolutely. And so you probably guessed it, it's data. And so I always like to say sort of the other side to what Mark was talking about, that data is the only way that we can really listen to our customers in today's world. And they're telling you a lot. We live in a digital first world. There's a lot of signals out there that they're giving you a good idea of what they're looking for. It's just a matter of setting yourself up to be able to listen to that and to understand that. And I think what Mark shared is really about all the ways that you absolutely need data in order to understand your own customers, validate some of those hypotheses we just talked about, continue to differentiate yourself in the market, as well as to continue measuring effectiveness of these programs. And so what I'm going to talk about a little bit more is some of the strategies and ways to think about data programs. What I will say is that we're not going to get into specific technologies or anything of that nature, because that's something that is very, very different for every organization, but definitely going to give you a good idea of how you should be thinking about it, how you approach that, how you figure out that North Star in order to make informed technology decisions and informed data decisions, where you're letting the strategy drive the conduit, being the technology and data, versus the other way around. So when we think about actually using data, it's about turning and shifting from a mindset of data just being something you use to data actually being an asset for your organization. And I realize when we say data monetization, a lot of times people think this is purely data monetization and that we sell data. And you get a lot of fear around that, because a lot of folks, will say that's just not something we do. I encourage you to think a little bit differently about it, though. Data monetization should be this broader term where you just think about extracting value from data. That can be both indirectly as well as directly. And so when we think about sort of indirect or, internal, it's contributing to all those things that Mark was mentioning. Figuring out how you improve your customer experience and your service, using your data to actually make that experience better, because we do know that has an effect on the bottom line for with your customers. Also improving operational improvements, making things more efficient. You use data to do that and to figure out how you optimize, to figure out how you don't spend money in certain places versus others. Using data and listening to your customers to feed back into product strategy and innovation. The more sophisticated organizations we're seeing actually have a mechanism through which marketing is a really important function for research and development into product strategy and innovation. So that's a huge area where data can become super valuable, and the data that marketers own versus somewhere else in the business. And then, of course, the more traditional one of just marketing and advertising ROI. Having more sophisticated measurement, because it's no longer can we sort of measure these unsophisticated metrics that are not super meaningful. And there's a lot more data out there that we can use to understand things like customer engagement scoring versus just CTR, for example, return on ad spend by channel versus just, last click attribution and things of that nature. So that's more on the internal side. And that's not even completely comprehensive, but that's a good idea of how you can actually extract value from that data. On the external side, then, is when you're actually treating this more like a binary product, right? And that can be in a few different ways. So data as a service, where you're actually providing access either through selling, renting, or providing that data through a second party sort of data sharing agreement. Providing that and making that available to another organization, as well as insights as a service. So a lot of times, you make that more valuable by actually running the insights on your own data and offering that in the form of audiences. We see a lot of travel and hospitality organizations getting into the media space game now. And I think we're going to continue seeing a lot of different organizations get into the media space game. The media network game, I mean. And so a lot of those where they're differentiating is by actually layering on those insights. So beyond just having sort of those addressable audiences, actually investing and creating insights in order to make that data more valuable and more meaningful to the organizations that they're either partnering with or selling to. And then analytics enabled products. So this is where you're actually taking that insights piece a step further and creating the ability for folks to use your data to actually power analytics. So we see this around for a while in forms of marketplaces and data co-ops and whatnot. But we're now seeing that become a lot more sort of sophisticated. I think with the embedding of things like clean rooms and actually running those analysis and making that available in your second party data sharing or data collaboration use cases and things of that nature. So as you can see, there's a lot of opportunities here to think about driving value from your data. And I think a lot of folks think, the external side, but they forget about that internal side. And it really is a full holistic way of thinking about it. And some of these may be more valuable for your business. Some of these may not even be a reality for you to sell them externally, but it's important to think about all the different opportunities you can find in driving value from your data in order to help you both from a differentiation experience with your own customers, but potentially also setting up a new revenue stream for your business based off of that valuable data. So just digging into this a little bit more in terms of sort of the internal piece here. This is really all about driving personalization at scale. And that can be manifested in a lot of different ways, right? Personalization at scale requires, yes, understanding what data you're going to use to inform messaging. It means automating that. So it's something that can be done in near real time and more frequently to actually meet customers and consumers where they're at in the moments that matter. But it also means making things a lot more efficient and using data at every step, both to measure that efficiency and then power those experiences is essential today. You absolutely have to be thinking about how you reduce the time and the speed to value, and also be sure that you're creating those moments that matter because, as Mark mentioned, those are the key things that customers are looking for today. And I think for the most part, organizations have figured this out, right? They've really said, okay, we get it. We need first-party data. We need to figure out how we personalize better. And that especially with the deprecation of cookies, with the change of digital identifiers, with the explosion of all the data that we have now, there's been this sort of clamoring to say, okay, first party data. And I bet a lot of you have done that, and feel free to drop in the chat if you've done that. And then also maybe some of the challenges you've had, or maybe how you haven't seen returns. We saw huge investments in that. And yet I don't think we're seeing the return in many cases that organizations expected. And I really think that's a result of a lack of data collaboration, which leads me to the secondary piece. I think a lot of organizations, and what we've seen with our clients is, yes, they clamored and they brought a lot of their own data. They got more sophisticated about their own data collection, but the value of that data wasn't really fully realized. If we think about it, there wasn't that exponential growth, sort of magical unlock that a lot of organizations expected to see after investing millions of dollars in that data. And ultimately, I think that's a result that first-party data on its own, it's important to know your customer, but you are limited to what your customer has told you, versus being able to actually know what your customer is just saying out there in general. So that's where we see data collaboration becoming really essential. And that's where I think data monetization now is really taking off. So you see it here sort of in two different ways, right? You've got, the first party data exchange, which really is then second party data sharing. And I think this is where we're seeing, and we should continue to expect to see the market go. You see it with the introduction and the explosion of the third wave of advertising with retail media networks. That is really a second party data sharing agreement, usually between CPGs and retailers. But like I said previously, now we're seeing a lot of other organizations get into the mix. But we're also seeing organizations work with other organizations to share that first party data, and realizing that as you enrich that customer profile, it's going to exponentially grow the value of their data. And where we're seeing a lot of organizations getting sophisticated about this is actually creating sort of tangible dollar amounts to their profiles and saying, okay, this is how much it's worth. If I continue to increase the attributes that are attached to that profile, I'm actually increasing the value because of these 3 to 4 reasons. And in that way, you're able to track it over time and really understand how it's growing. Oops, sorry, I just went into the dark. I might have to do this rest of the thing in the dark. Sorry, guys. And so in any case, there's a lot of opportunities there, both second party data sharing and then making your data just more available in a more concrete fashion through setting up a new retail or new revenue stream through pure play sort of data monetization, selling the data itself, or making that available on an open exchange or something of that nature. So shared a lot of different opportunities there. And you're probably sitting there thinking that's a whole lot, but where do we get started? And of course, there's got to be some planning and big programs around all of that. But I think the most important thing when you start thinking about data monetization is to actually start with a much more narrow mindset. You have to start with understanding what is your organization's unique value prop. What unique customer data do you have? And do you collect, or do you have the opportunity to collect that can then be used across all those different opportunities? And this is something where you should be thinking beyond just your marketing team. You should be engaging the rest of your other teams, market research. You should be engaging as well your technology teams to really think about this collectively and bringing together and breaking down those silos to make sure you're all aligning to sort of that North Star and that salient sort of identification of your X factor, so to speak. After that, use that to then inventory your data, understand where you have gaps, and figure out how you would go about closing those gaps and whether or not that's going to be worth it, right? So, of course, we would love to all do this, but we are living in a world where we have to be smart about where we spend our money and where you're making your big bets. So the last piece here is that business case, making sure that you're doing the diligence to understand the return you're going to see. As part of any sophisticated business case for data monetization, of which we help with quite a few, both on the internal and the external side, it is about creating that measurement framework that is somewhat of an art and a science, but bringing it together to actually say, this is the actual number that we're putting to this profile. This is the actual amount, and that actual sophisticated measurement approach that will then serve as the baseline as you continue down the program. And it's also about that test and learn approach. So thinking big, but starting small and then continuing to move quickly. So setting up that measurement framework is going to help you continuously get investment back from the business to continue on with your data monetization activities. But it's also essential that you hold yourself accountable by continuously upholding that test and learn and thinking about how you update or reinvest in the programs that you're creating to continue to grow and extract that value from your data. So I know we've gone through a ton of content, and I'm sure there's a ton of questions. So I'll hand it over to Nancy now to hopefully field some of those.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel and Mark. This was fantastic. Really enjoyed everything that you had to say. You really brought us through the whole journey. I love the data on the pandemic. It's really enlightening to think, I wrote it down, 61% of executives are saying that they have more loyal client base, and 20% of consumers are saying that they're more loyal. So there's a huge opportunity out here for marketers to really take that data, take the personalization, move it forward, and increase those numbers, right? Really nice. Okay, we have lots of questions from the audience, so why don't I go ahead and jump right in? The first question we have is about your survey. So I think you said there were over 4,000 respondents to the survey, and someone noticed that there's differences in your survey and they're interesting. Did other brand loyalty findings that reflect generational data jump out to you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good one, and certainly an interesting lens that we were putting on, taking cuts of it. I think a couple of things come to mind. I mentioned, I think as we were going through it, for example, that bad experiences with products and services, but also with customer service, were the number one and number two reason why Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers were all telling us they were leaving brands. So that was consistent across everybody. Where it starts to split a little bit is what comes after that. I think we could all probably understand a bad experience is a bad experience, but for younger generations, Gen Z specifically, a little bit less so millennials, for example, we heard that it was actually not necessarily the bad experience they had with one brand. It was the amazing experience they had with another brand that was the reason that they were switching. So again, outside of the brand, and remember, in the context of this survey, what we're comparing against are companies that these consumers told us they were previously loyal to for the 12 months prior to the survey. So they had actually experienced a different brand from the one that they were loyal to, that was so great that sort of convinced them to switch over. On the Gen X and the baby boomer side, for example, which I found really surprising, the number three reason why they were switching brands was actually to support or boycott issues that are important in society the brand didn't agree with. My hypothesis going in was that probably would have been more of our Gen Z and millennials, but actually we heard the opposite. And then in addition to that, one other probably thing worth mentioning on difference, generationally speaking, is who's willing to share and what type of data. So younger demographics, we talked about Black and Hispanic consumers, urban consumers willing to share more. But the older groups, as well as lower income consumers, don't even think, in some extent, in many industries, that personalization is important at all for certain types of businesses. So that was another interesting dynamic. And I know our time here is short, but certainly we have more probably cuts of this if there's interest to feel free to reach out. But yeah, thank you.
No, thank you very much. And, just thinking about Gen Z, and I like the fact that you said it wasn't the bad experience, it was actually the good experience, but also there's just so much more out there. I think for Gen Z to discover brands with influencers and all of our social platforms, that you really have to have a great experience because there's so much competition out there and so much to get their attention. So, our next question is, my company has a lot of data that can be segmented in many ways. How do I know what will be most effective in driving customer loyalty and greater value?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think unfortunately the answer may be unsatisfactory. It's going to be about testing and actually figuring it out. And your marketers, you know what you're selling, you know what your unique value prop is. You have good hypotheses. So it's about taking those hypotheses and creating programs where you can actually test those hypotheses. And then, like I said, just making sure you're setting up that test and learn framework that can support that. So it's always about starting small. And I think just proving out that personalization works, and that a personalized message is going to see more return usually than a non-personalized one or personalized experience. But then about, figuring out how you continuously optimize that and continuously feed more hypotheses into that framework is how you're eventually going to figure out, okay, this is, where we definitely want to continue personalizing. And what we generally say is like there's a 70-30 rule. You can update that based off of the level of risk, based off of, the level of risk in terms of getting it right. But we usually like to say 70% of sort of your activities go to business as usual and 30% goes to experimentation. And if you can instill that paradigm within your organization, you'll be able to, continuously have everyone in that growth mindset to always be thinking about optimizing and always be thinking about taking that experience to the next level.
Thank you. And with this next question, I think everybody's ears are going to be tuning up to this one. There's a statement and a question here. Our company structure seems to be slowing us down. Multiple teams with competing priorities are in charge of our personalization efforts. I think a lot of people feel that pain. So, Rachel, Mark, do you have any recommendations on what has worked well for companies to really scale and take quick actions?
I can take this one, then Mark, I'm sure you're gonna have your idea of it as well. So I would just say, maybe a statement first, embrace the tension. We're at a point in our growth as an industry where a lot of different teams are coming together that have never had to before. Marketing with IT, marketing with finance, a lot more connections that are happening, and don't shy away from the tension and don't, I think, give up. I think just acknowledging that it's very natural, acknowledging that you're asking a lot of teams to change, and acknowledging that this is new for everyone is something that we as consultants come in and a lot of time are helping with, but it's also something you don't need us for, which I maybe shouldn't say, but you really don't. You can drive that consensus and make sure you all understand that you're swimming in the same direction. And where it comes to actually creating sort of that collaboration without necessarily going through a huge org change is, like I said, coming up with that business case together, figuring out what is that North Star, figuring out how you're actually going to measure success, and make sure everyone's aligned to it. Because then when you actually go and actually do the program, which is the hard part, right? That's when things start to get really tense and things start to really heat up. Everyone knows where the finish line is, or everyone knows, what you're trying to go towards. And it helps a lot alleviate some of that, I think, inner company sort of tension. But that's always what I say to my clients. The tension is good. It means that people care. It means that people are thinking about it. They're trying to think about what's best. But acknowledging that and then figuring out a more objective way of measuring success will help a lot. But Mark, I'm sure you have, maybe from the organizational side, some other ideas about,
Yeah, honestly, Rachel, you nailed it. What I'd like to add, probably one or two small things here. to Rachel's point, you're asking teams to work differently than they've had to in the past. Having that test and learn mindset, proving value, proving incrementality on a really small scale, low effort, I think can show the value of personalization doesn't live within just one area of the company. It needs to change the ways of working across all these teams that are interacting, from digital marketing to media marketing to product and channels to finance, as Rachel mentioned. Having, and this is hard because everybody we talk to is resource constrained and they're strapped, and this is an additional thing that takes a lot of effort, particularly around measurement of these types of engagement tactics. Setting aside some time to focus on this and having a shared set of metrics or outcomes in the short term that can help everybody work in one direction cross-functionally. I think a lot what we've seen with clients is having people even temporarily stepping out of roles within their sort of defined departmental structures into sort of a temporary community or personalization center of excellence or whatever they may call it, as a way of driving that agenda, proving the value of it, and then taking it back across all the different customer touch points and the teams that are impacted by those touch points on a day-to-day basis.
Great. Mark, I heard two words there that you said that I'm going to pick up on, channel and measurement. So I'm going to switch to marketplaces. And the question is, how do I start to assess the value of my data and demand in marketplaces?
Yeah, that's going to be a little bit of both internal and external. So when we think about those marketplaces, generally, when it comes to putting your data in a marketplace, whoever is owning that marketplace is going to give you a good idea of what they think your data is worth. It's important for you as an organization, though, to actually think about what that is. And so actually go through the diligence of creating that value. Usually, or thinking about and labeling that value, but usually you have to use sort of a third party to get the insights that you would need to understand the competitive landscape. So it could be a consultancy. We do this a lot, helping organizations with data monetization. We do this a lot for private equity organizations as well, because they are starting to see that data is a very valuable asset for organizations that they're either buying or selling. And so generally, though, you're not going to have insights to those things. And it's good to use a third party just to make sure that you're validating what you think and working with them to sort of say, here's what we think is valuable. Can you help us assign a number to that? And then it's, thinking about your marketplace strategy in general. There are a lot of marketplaces out there, and there will continue to be more. Thinking about where it makes sense, making sure that you're comfortable with that provider and you're doing your diligence there is going to be essential too. So beyond just thinking about the value, I'd be remiss not to say, making sure you're engaging all the right teams, making sure you're doing the diligence of what that data is going to be, because ultimately you are the stewards of your customers' data. And you want to make sure that you're doing that ethically and responsibly. And so I would say, yes, usually you have to engage an outside team, but also take some accountability and make sure you're in the driver's seat of calling out, what is the X factor about your data, making sure you're thinking about that strategy prior to even engaging anyone externally.
Great. And we have time for a couple more questions. The next one I have is, what are the biggest challenges to implement personalization at scale?
I can go ahead and start here, Rachel, if you want to add on. I think there's a couple. We talked a little bit about measurement. Measurement it's both an art and a science, and I think it'll come down to the top down sort of strategy. What are we using this measurement for? A lot of times, as Rachel was talking about, in this 70-30 world, you're starting small, you're experimenting, and then that's really what you want to use to figure out what's working, how do we extrapolate value out of that from our data to larger and larger audiences to really move the needle. Certainly working cross-functionally, we touched on ways of working organizationally. I think one other big area, I think Rachel hit on this as well, is that companies are well in the path of understanding that data is valuable. What can we do to bring that data together, make it more accessible across the organization? I think where we see a lot of our clients disappointed or stumble a little bit is at the point now, okay, how do we activate that really quickly? The at scale part of personalization. How do we create enough content fast enough that's brand approved that we can, put real time in front of our customers at different channels and different points? How do we personalize that content and develop the library? I think that's the part that's really, really challenging, and for a number of different reasons. That we're seeing movement in and changes, and we're going to continue to see that, I think, for some time over the coming year. And it's really exciting. It's really exciting stuff, because I think consumers are showing that it's valuable for them. And so it's worthy of the investments that companies are making to make that technology and data come together to serve that up in new ways.
I would echo everything Mark says, and then I would just say, making sure that you've got the skill sets, whether you're augmenting that externally or you're actually building those capabilities in-house. It's important that you have a certain data literacy. It's important. We talked about personalization, accountability is on everyone, but it's not just, what is personalization, that sort of buzzword. It's how do I contribute to personalization? So creating sort of those upskilling opportunities, investing in those, and bringing everyone along for the ride is really, really essential. I think that's something as well where we see a lot of organizations struggle. You've got these marketers who are evangelists, and they're kind of like, well, we get it. And they don't really bring the rest of the organization along for the journey. And then they have one really awesome sort of activation, but they can't ever scale it. And so I think it's important that you think about, the comms plan, the change management, so that you don't have that experiment just live on as a great legend, but actually have it become your business as usual.
Okay.
If I could pile on to one thing Rachel talked about is around upskilling resources and building these capabilities in-house. You check, it's August 2023, so we'd be remiss not to talk more about artificial intelligence, but I think that both on the internal and on the external side, there's going to be drastic amounts of opportunity that can provide, both from an operational standpoint, ways of working, content velocity, as well as on the external side too. And I think that, there's certainly tons of investment, tons of upskilling opportunity for everybody in any role, whether it's marketing or, analytics or finance, to understand how these all come together to drive business value. And, we're gonna see a lot of really exciting things in this space, I think, over the next several months.
Thank you for touching on that. And this next question I love because it's both practical and critical here. How can I start to aggregate customer data that is spread across multiple platforms and databases? The critical question: should I leverage it or start fresh? What's your advice?
Don't start fresh. Don't start over. No, it's a big, big investment, and that's the quickest way to just make sure your CEO and CFO never give you more money. Work what you have, right? And start small. And before you go and make these huge transformations, make sure that you're proving out the value. So do not, and there's enough technology out there, and there will continue to be more technology out there that can help enable marketers to better use data. I mean, I think the most obvious examples today is a CDP. We're now hearing, our traditional CDPs becoming really table stakes for every organization. I don't think we work with many organizations who, if they don't already have a CDP, they're asking the question of which CDP should I get, or they're already moving on to their second CDP, as well as, data clean rooms and things of that nature. And I think what you're going to see with these technologies is they're continuing to evolve. These roadmaps are very aggressive because they're solving for a really big need. So when you're investing in something, you don't need to go and rip everything out. Invest in something that you also believe in the roadmap of. Think about that technology and their vision of where they're going and what you're hoping for. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's something where you can really think about, okay, I need something that grows with me. And and I'm not going to rip everything out, but eventually I would like to break down some of these silos. So what's going to help me break down a silo, and where do I see a roadmap that will continue to help me do that? And so do not just start over. You'll get really lost in that, and you gotta fix the plane while you're flying it to some extent. But think about what's out there. Look at look at what you're trying to solve for. There is a technology out there that can help you with that. And there will continue to be technologies that can help you with that. So I would just say start with your strategy, let that drive your technology choices. And you can build a solution around that versus ripping everything apart.
Thank you. Rachel and Mark, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. Thank you to our audience for all these questions. We really appreciate it. It was wonderful having you with us today. Before we wrap up, let me take a moment and tell everybody what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can always register for more upcoming live analyst and Tech Talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side of the house, don't forget Behind the Numbers. That's our daily podcast. We also have Reimagining Retail and the Banking and Payment Show, so check them out. And also check out our newsletters. We have a new retail media newsletter that's a weekly that comes out on Mondays, as well as a retail newsletter, our flagship eMarketer Daily, as well as a chart of the day and banking and payments. Keep your eye on your email because we are sending out the link to today's recording. Also, you'll get a copy of the slides. Please pass them around your organization. There's more information from PwC in there. This was really great. You want to share it. You want to leverage this. You want to get your personalization strategy, your data strategy up to speed. 2024 is right around the corner, believe it or not. Thank you all for your time. Thanks again, Rachel and Mark, the entire team at PwC, our studio team, our production team, everyone behind the scenes. Thank you so much. We'll see you on our next webinar. Bye-bye.